The paper in Ida Baker's hand was shaking, and it was not from the wind. She stood in the doorway of the Shepard ranch house, the envelope already torn open, the letter already read twice over, and she watched the man across the room go completely still. Levi Shepard had his back to her when she came in, his broad shoulders squared against the late afternoon light pouring through the kitchen window, one hand resting on the edge of the rough-hewn table. He had been expecting news. Ranchers always expected news when a telegraph messenger made the 20-mile ride out from Laramie in the middle of a working week. But he had not been expecting this. "Say it again," he said, and his voice was so quiet it barely reached her. Ida cleared her throat. She had rehearsed the words on horseback for 4 hours. She had told herself she was a professional. She had told herself that delivering bad news was part of the job, that she had done it before, that she would do it again, and that she would feel nothing beyond the clean, practiced sympathy of someone who knew how to hold herself together. She had been wrong on every single count. "The deed," she said carefully, "has been transferred." The title to the Shepard grazing lands, all 4,300 acres including the south pasture and the river corridor, was filed in Laramie 3 days ago, filed under the name of the Continental Land Trust of Denver. She paused. "Your brother Ellis signed it over." Levi Shepard turned around. He was a big man, the kind of big that came from 30 years of physical work rather than any particular gift of nature. And his face was the face of someone who had learned to keep his feelings underneath something hard and useful. Dark eyes, jaw like a fence post, a scar along the left side of his chin from a wire fence accident that had happened when he was 19. Ida had seen his face described on the telegraph intake form where the ranch's account was listed, because the telegraph office kept records on all their regular clients, and she had thought it was an oddly detailed thing for a form to note, the scar. Now, looking at him, she understood why whoever had filled out that form had felt compelled to include it. He was the kind of man whose face you remembered. He was also the kind of man who, in this particular moment, looked as though the earth had just opened under his boots. "Ellis," he said, not a question. The word came out like something being dropped from a great height. "The signature was witnessed by a notary in Denver," Ida said. "The telegraph I was asked to deliver to you contains notice of the filing. The land trust has already retained a lawyer. They intend to begin surveying next month." Levi Shepard sat down. He sat down heavily in the nearest chair, and he pressed both palms flat against the table, and he stared at the grain of the wood for a long time without saying anything at all. Ida Baker stood in the doorway and did not leave. She should have left. Her job was to deliver the message, collect the delivery fee if applicable, and ride back to Laramie before full dark. She had a room at the boarding house on 2nd Street. She had a horse to return to the livery stable. She had 3 other telegrams queued for delivery the following morning, including one to the Haverson farm 16 miles east. She had a life that was precise and organized and entirely her own, built carefully and painstakingly over the 4 years since she had come to Wyoming territory alone at the age of 24 with nothing but a leather satchel, a letter of recommendation from the Denver telegraph office, and a reputation for being the fastest, most accurate Morse code operator west of the Missouri River. She should absolutely have left. She did not leave. Because she was the one who had brought this catastrophe to Levi Shepard's door. And she was the one, though she could not yet say how or why, who was going to have to help him survive it. That was how it started. Now go back with her, 6 weeks earlier, to understand how it came to be that Ida Baker, telegraph operator and licensed message courier for the Wyoming Territorial Telegraph Service, ended up riding 20 miles into the wind with a letter that would unravel one man's entire world. The telegraph office in Laramie in the spring of 1884 was a narrow building wedged between a hardware store and a claims office on Main Street, and it smelled always of ink and machine oil, and the particular metallic warmth of equipment that ran all day without stopping. Ida had worked there for 4 years. She had started as an operator and within 8 months had been promoted to senior operator, a title that meant she was responsible for the accuracy of every message that came through, for training the 2 junior operators who worked the overnight shift, and for personally couriering any message that was classified as sensitive, legal, or high value. She was 28 years old and she was very good at her job. She was good at her job because she was precise. She had a mind that organized itself naturally around patterns and codes, around the click and rhythm of the telegraph key, around the way information could be compressed into the smallest possible space without losing its meaning. She had taught herself Morse code from a book at the age of 17 in Cincinnati, Ohio, where she had grown up in a household that believed women were suited for embroidery and social calls, and where she had felt, for as long as she could remember, like a person who had been handed the wrong life by accident. Wyoming territory was not the wrong life. Wyoming territory was exactly right. It was wide and cold and demanded things of you, and nobody particularly cared whether you embroidered as long as you could do your work and keep your accounts paid. The telegram that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning in early April, routed through the Denver relay station at 9:14 in the morning. Ida was the one at the key. She copied it down in her clean, unambiguous handwriting, and then she read it back once, and then she read it back again, because what it said was unusual enough that she wanted to be certain she had not made an error. It was from a law office in Denver, addressed to one Levi Shepard, care of the Shepard Ranch, Laramie Valley, Wyoming Territory. It stated that pursuant to a deed transfer executed on April 7, 1884, the Continental Land Trust of Denver had acquired the title to the Shepard grazing lands through a purchase agreement signed by Ellis Shepard, brother of Levi Shepard and co-signatory on the original homestead claim. It stated that representatives of the trust would be arriving to survey the property beginning May 15th, and that Levi Shepard was advised to consult legal counsel at his earliest convenience. Ida read it 3 times. Then she went to the file cabinet and pulled the account record for the Shepard Ranch. The ranch had been a client of the Laramie Telegraph Office for 11 years. The primary account holder was listed as Levi Shepard, age 34, of the Shepard Ranch, Laramie Valley, established by Homestead Claim 1873. Under the field that asked for a physical description, for identification purposes in case of in-person pickup, someone had written, "Tall, dark eyes, scar on left jaw, reliable customer." She looked at the message again. There was nothing in the message that was ambiguous. It was a legal notice. It was genuine, properly formatted, properly rooted, sent from a law office she could verify with a return query if she needed to. The deed transfer had happened. Someone named Ellis Shepard had signed away what was very likely this man's entire life. She marked the message as requiring personal courier delivery, sensitive legal document, and she assigned herself to write it out. Her supervisor, a round-faced man named Harold Briggs, who was genuinely fond of Ida and genuinely terrified of her intelligence in equal measure, looked at the delivery assignment and said, "That's a 20-mile ride, Baker. I can send one of the boys." "The boys," Ida said, "will stop at the roadhouse halfway and arrive smelling like whiskey. I will be there and back before sundown." She picked up her satchel. "Have my horse saddled." Harold Briggs did not argue with her. Nobody argued with Ida Baker once she had made up her mind about something, because arguing with Ida Baker was like arguing with the telegraph itself. She simply kept transmitting until you gave up. The ride out to the Shepard Ranch was 20 miles of grass and sky, and the particular Wyoming spring wind that came at you sideways no matter which direction you were facing. Ida rode well. She had learned to ride in Wyoming because she had needed to learn to ride in Wyoming, the same way she had learned to shoot, to navigate by stars, to butcher a rabbit if she was hungry enough in the field, and to read weather patterns off the horizon. She had needed all of these things because the frontier did not offer alternatives. You either acquired the skills or you suffered the consequences, and Ida Baker had never had much patience for consequences. She arrived at the Shepard Ranch at 4:15 in the afternoon. The property was immediately impressive in a way that made the message in her satchel feel heavier than paper had any right to be. The grazing land stretched in every direction. Bordered on the south by the clear run of a river she recognized from the survey maps as the Laramie River's eastern tributary. There were cattle in the south pasture, maybe 300 head, and the ranch house itself was solid and well kept, built from timber that had been properly cured, with a porch that ran the full length of the front face and a barn behind it that looked large enough to house a serious operation. Someone had built this place with great care and real intention. Someone had worked for a very long time to make something out here worth having. She knocked on the door. No answer. She went around to the back and found a man repairing a fence post with a sledgehammer, his back to her, driving the post into ground that was still half frozen from the winter. She waited until he had finished the strike before she called out, because she had learned that surprising a man with a sledgehammer was inadvisable. "Mr. Shepard," he turned around. Same face as the form had suggested, though the form had understated it considerably. The scar along his jaw, the dark eyes that took her measure with the efficiency of someone who had learned to read people the way she read code, quickly and without ornamentation. "That's right," he said. "Who are you?" "Ida Baker, Wyoming Territorial Telegraph Service. I have a document for you, classified as sensitive legal delivery. I need to confirm your identity before I can hand it over." He set the sledgehammer down. "Scar on the jaw, dark eyes, reliable customer," he said, with a dry note that suggested he had received enough telegrams to know exactly how the office described him. "That good enough?" "Yes, sir." She handed him the envelope. And then she watched him read it, and she watched the thing happen to his face that she had been bracing for the entire 20-mile ride, the thing that made her absolutely certain she had been right to come herself instead of sending one of the boys. He did not fall apart. He did not curse or shout or throw the letter across the yard. He went very still, in the way that something goes still when it is absorbing a shock too large to process immediately, and he folded the letter back along its original creases, and he said, very quietly, "Come inside." That was when they went into the kitchen. That was when the paper started shaking in her hands. That was where the story had already begun. By the time Levi Shepard sat down at his own table and stared at the wood grain and said his brother's name like a man dropping something heavy off the edge of something steep. "Ellis," Ida said carefully. "Was he a co-owner?" The legal filing referenced a co-signatory on the original homestead claim. Levi looked up at her. "He was. Our father filed the original claim in 1873 when we were boys. He put both our names on it because he was a man who believed in fairness and he thought it would bind us together." A pause. "He died in 1879. We ran the ranch together for 2 years after that, Ellis and me. Then Ellis left. Said he wanted to try his luck in Denver, said he was not cut out for ranching." Another pause. "I paid him out. I gave him his share of the cattle proceeds and the operating funds we had at the time, $3,000, which was everything I had. I thought that settled it." "It would have settled the operating funds," Ida said. "But if his name was still on the original homestead claim, then his legal right to sign a deed transfer may never have been properly extinguished. That would depend on how the original claim was worded and whether there was a formal buyout agreement recorded." Levi looked at her with a kind of startled attention, as though he had not quite expected the telegraph operator to have an opinion on the finer points of land title law. "You know property claims." "I read a great deal," Ida said, which was true as far as it went. What she did not say was that she had made it her business over 4 years of handling legal and financial telegrams to understand the basic framework of the laws that governed the things those telegrams described, because understanding the law made her better at her job, and because she believed that ignorance was the most preventable of all the difficulties one could face. The question is whether Ellis's name was formally removed from the claim when you paid him out. Do you have any paperwork from that transaction? I have a letter he signed saying he received the money and considered himself bought out. Is it witnessed and notarized? Levi was quiet for a moment. No. Ida pressed her lips together. The situation was worse than the telegram had suggested, which she had suspected even before she arrived. A witnessed and notarized release would have been defensible. An informal letter between brothers was considerably less so, particularly if a well-funded land trust had already retained legal counsel in Denver. You need a lawyer, she said. A good one. In Laramie or Cheyenne. Not someone who handles wills and cattle disputes. Someone who knows territorial land law. And how much time do I have? The survey team arrives May 15th. That is 41 days. Levi Shepard looked at her across the kitchen table, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Outside, the wind moved through the grass and the cattle shifted in the south pasture, and the late afternoon light stretched golden and indifferent across the floor between them. Why are you still here? He said, not unkindly, genuinely curious. Ida thought about it honestly. Because I brought this to your door, she said, and because I think I might be able to help you. It was an unusual thing to offer, she knew that. She was a telegraph operator from Laramie, 20 miles from this ranch, with no personal stake in the outcome of this man's legal crisis. She had other telegrams to deliver. She had a life that was precisely organized and entirely her own. She stayed for dinner. It was not planned. Levi had put water on for coffee without asking her, and there was a pot of beans and salt pork on the back of the stove that he had left there that morning, and before either of them had made any conscious decision about it, she was sitting at his table eating supper and going through the details of what he knew about the Continental Land Trust of Denver. What he knew was not much. He had heard the name once, in passing, from another rancher in Laramie, who had mentioned a land company buying up parcels in the Southern Territories. He had not paid particular attention at the time because the Shepard Ranch had not, until this moment, appeared to be in any danger. What Ida knew was more. She had received 11 telegrams in the past 18 months that referenced the Continental Land Trust of Denver, because sensitive business communications went through the telegraph office, and she paid attention to everything that came through the key. She had not done anything improper by noting them. She had simply noticed, the way a precise mind notices patterns. The trust had acquired land in 3 other Wyoming counties. Always through the same method, identifying properties where the original homestead claim had more than one name attached to it, finding the secondary signatory, and purchasing their rights for a fraction of the land's actual value. It is a pattern, she said. They look for vulnerabilities in the original claim structure, find the weak point, and exploit it before the primary owner has any idea what is happening. By the time the legal notice arrives, they already have everything filed. Levi stared at her. How do you know all of this? I operate the key, she said simply. I read everything that comes through. I have a very good memory. He was quiet for a moment. Could you remember the names? The other ranchers they did this to, she could. She gave him 3 names from 3 different counties, ranchers who had received similar notices in the past year. 2 of them had lost their land. One had managed to fight back through the territorial court and had won, but only after 14 months of litigation, and with the help of a lawyer from Cheyenne named Walter Prout who had a particular expertise in homestead law. Walter Prout, Levi said, writing the name down on a piece of paper with a pencil stub he pulled from his vest pocket. Cheyenne. He is the best option you have, Ida said. If anyone can build a case for invalidating Ellis's right to transfer the title, it is him. She rode back to Laramie that night under a half-moon, arriving at the boarding house at nearly 11 o'clock, tired and wind-scoured and thinking about dark eyes and a jaw like a fence post, and the particular quiet that a man carried when he was holding something catastrophic together by nothing but the force of his own discipline. She thought about him for longer than she intended to. 3 days later, Levi Shepard rode into the telegraph office in Laramie. Ida was at the key when he came in, and she finished the message she was sending before she looked up, because she did not stop in the middle of a transmission. When she did look up, he was standing at the counter with his hat in his hands, and there was something slightly different about his expression than there had been at the ranch, something less like pure shock and more like the beginnings of a plan. "I sent a telegram to Walter Pruitt in Cheyenne," he said. "He replied this morning. He wants to meet, but he says I need to gather documentation first. Original claim papers, any correspondence with Ellis, records of the payoff, anything I can find." He paused. "I also went to the county clerk's office to look at the filed transfer. The filing is real and complete. The trust paid Ellis $11,000 for his share." $11,000. Ida kept her face neutral. That was enough money to make a man do things he might not have otherwise considered. It did not make it right. It did not make it any less of a betrayal. But it explained the arithmetic of Ellis Shepard's decision in a way that pure greed alone did not fully account for. "Ellis needed money," she said. "Apparently." Levi's jaw was tight. "He wrote me a letter last fall. I did not know at the time what it was about, but he mentioned that he had made some investments in Denver that had not gone the way he hoped. I sent him $200 because he was my brother, and I thought he was just in a temporary difficulty." His voice was controlled and flat, the way a fire is flat when it is burning under something. "He took $200 from me in November and then signed over my land to a corporation in February." The word betrayal hung in the air between them like smoke. "I am sorry," Ida said. She meant it precisely and without embellishment, the way she meant most things. "I did not come to be sorry for," Levi said, not unkindly. "I came to ask if you would be willing to help me search for relevant telegrams in the office records. Any communications between Ellis Shepard and the Land Trust, or the Land Trust's lawyers, that might have gone through this office. It would help Pruitt build a timeline." Ida considered this. Office records were not confidential in the absolute sense. They could be subpoenaed in legal proceedings, and a legitimate legal case with a named lawyer and a real filing was as close to a legal proceeding as she needed to be. "I can review what we have," she said. "I will need to clear it with Harold." Harold Briggs, when consulted, looked nervous and then looked at Ida and decided that nervous was worse than helpful. He agreed. She found 4 relevant telegrams in the records over the following 2 days. One was a communication between Ellis Shepard and a Denver law office from January of 1884, arranging a meeting. 2 were between the Land Trust's legal representative and their Denver office discussing the Shepard property specifically, including a reference to Ellis Shepard having agreed in principle to the sale. The 4th was a routing confirmation that had passed through Laramie on its way to Cheyenne, showing that the trust had been working this acquisition for at least 6 months before the deed was filed. She copied them out by hand, in her precise and legible script, with dates, routing numbers, and transmission times. She organized them chronologically, and added a brief summary note explaining the significance of each one in relation to the deed transfer timeline. When Levi came back to collect them, he looked at the packet of copied documents and then at Ida, and something shifted in his expression. "You put a summary in," he said. "For the lawyer's convenience," she said. He started again. "This is exactly the kind of organization Pruitt is going to need. This is precisely what he asked for when I spoke to him. I assumed as much." He looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Baker, would you be willing to ride to Cheyenne with me? To speak with Pruitt yourself about what you have found? You could testify to the content of these telegrams in their original form as the operator on duty, which would make them admissible in a territorial court proceeding." This was not a small thing he was asking. Cheyenne was 2 days' ride from Laramie. A round trip was 4 days, minimum, plus however long the meeting with the lawyer took. She would need to arrange coverage for her shift. She would need to consult Harold again. She would need a good reason for doing any of it. She thought about the 4,300 acres, the river corridor, the 300 head of cattle in the south pasture, the house built from timber that had been properly cured. The man who had put both palms flat on the table and stared at the wood grain and held a catastrophe together by the force of his own discipline. She thought about the pattern she had seen in 11 telegrams over 18 months, and the two ranchers who had lost everything, and the one who had fought and won. "I will speak with Harold," she said. "Give me until morning." Harold Briggs gave her the time, partly because she argued the case so well that he could not find a counterargument, and partly because she was the best operator the Laramie office had ever had, and he was genuinely afraid of what she might do if he refused her. They left for Cheyenne 2 mornings later. It was a strange thing, riding alongside someone for 2 days with a crisis between you. The road south to Cheyenne followed the valley for the first 30 miles before climbing toward the higher ground, and the spring grasses were greening up along the creek bottoms, and the sky was enormous in the way that Wyoming sky was always enormous, too large to look at directly if you were from anywhere that had trees to interrupt it. Ida was not from anywhere that had trees, not in the sense that mattered. She had been in Wyoming long enough that the sky felt normal to her. They talked. They talked because 2 days on horseback with a shared problem demands conversation, and because both of them turned out to be people who found silence comfortable, but found interesting conversation more comfortable still. Levi knew the land around them with the specific intimacy of someone who had ridden it all his life, and he named things as they passed them without showing off about it. The creek bend where the elk bedded in early spring, the ridge line where you could see 3 different mountain ranges if the atmosphere was clear, the particular quality of the soil in the river bottom that made the grass grow different from the highland pasture. Ida listened to all of it and filed it away in the part of her mind that kept things, which was a large part. She also talked. She told him about Cincinnati and the embroidery household and the telegraph book she had taught herself from at 17. She told him about the Denver office and the job offer that had brought her to Wyoming and the way she had felt on the morning she arrived in Laramie for the first time, standing on the platform with her leather satchel, looking at the enormous sky and thinking, "Yes, this is the place." "Did you know anyone here?" Levi asked. "No. You just came alone." "Yes." He thought about this for a moment. "That is a brave thing." "It is a practical thing," she said. "I needed work. The work was here. Bravery had nothing to do with it." He smiled. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and it changed the geometry of his face in a way that she noted with more attention than was probably professional. "I suspect," he said, "that you say that because you do not consider yourself particularly brave. But the fact that practical decisions are the ones that frighten other people most is not something you have to deny on my account." She looked at him. He was watching the road ahead, and there was something in his profile that was careful and considered, the face of a man who had learned to think before he spoke and who said things that were worth the wait. "You are more observant than I expected," she said. "Ranching gives you a lot of time to watch things," he said. "Animals, weather, people. You get to know the difference between what something looks like and what it actually is." She thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. They stayed at a way station the first night, one of the rough overnight stops that the territorial road maintained for travelers, with separate accommodations and a dining table shared with 2 other parties heading south. Ida ate and went to bed early and lay awake longer than she intended, listening to the wind work at the eaves of the building and thinking about secrets and patterns and the specific nature of betrayal between brothers. The meeting with Walter Pruitt in Cheyenne took place the following afternoon, in an office above a bank on Capitol Avenue. Pruitt was a thin man in his 50s with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers and the particular manner of a lawyer who had won enough difficult cases to have stopped being impressed by difficulty. He read Ida's organized summary of the telegraph records in complete silence, and when he finished he looked up at her and said, "You prepared this?" "Yes." "You are the senior operator at the Laramie office?" "Yes." "And you can testify to the original transmission records in court as a qualified custodian of those records?" "Yes." Prout set the papers down on his desk with a precise and satisfied motion. "Mr. Shepard," he said, turning to Levi, "this is exactly what I needed. The timeline Miss Baker has established shows that the land trust began negotiating with Ellis Shepard at least 6 months before the deed was filed, during a period when Ellis Shepard's right to transfer the title was legally questionable at best. We have the informal release letter you signed, we have proof of the financial settlement, and we have a pattern of communications that suggests the trust's lawyers were fully aware they were operating in a gray area and proceeded anyway." He tapped the papers. "This is a case we can win." Levi was very still in his chair. "How long will it take?" "Minimum 6 months in the territorial court, possibly longer if they appeal. The survey team arriving in May is a concern, but we can file for an injunction to delay the survey pending the outcome of the litigation." Prout looked at his papers again. "The injunction will be easier to obtain if Miss Baker can provide a sworn affidavit regarding the telegraph records and their content." Ida had not expected this. "An affidavit? You would not need to be present in Cheyenne for it. We can prepare the document and have it notarized in Laramie. But your testimony is potentially the strongest piece of evidence in this case, because it establishes that the trust acted with full knowledge of the disputed title and proceeded anyway. That speaks to bad faith, which is exactly the angle I intend to pursue." She looked at Levi. He was looking at her with an expression she could not fully read, something complicated and layered that she did not yet have the vocabulary to translate. "I will provide the affidavit," she said. She said it without hesitation. She noticed that about herself afterward, the complete absence of hesitation, the way the decision had come not from analysis, but from something more immediate and less organized than analysis. She stored that information away in the filing system of her mind and did not look at it directly for several days. The ride back to Laramie took 2 more days. They stopped at the same way station, and this time when they sat at the dinner table, they were not 2 strangers sharing a crisis, but something closer to 2 people who had agreed on something important together and were now living in the shared space of that agreement. Levi told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father who had been a man of enormous stubbornness and considerable principle, about the years before Ellis left when the 2 of them had worked the land together and been, if not close in the way some brothers were close, at least companionable. About how Ellis had always chafed against the ranch, against the physical weight of it, the dailiness of it, the way it asked everything from you every single day and gave you back something that was real but never showy. "Did you know he was in financial trouble?" Ida asked. "The letter in November was the first real sign. Before that, he was just absent, living his life in Denver, whatever that meant. I got word of him through other people occasionally. He was working in a trading company." "Investments, I gathered." Levi turned his coffee cup in his hands. "I should have paid more attention. You are not responsible for what he did." "No," Levi agreed. "But I am responsible for not having protected the property against the possibility. I should have had a lawyer formally document the buyout in 1881. I knew it at the time and I was too trusting to follow through." He was quiet for a moment. "He is still my brother. That is the part that I cannot quite." He stopped, started again. "The betrayal is one thing. The fact that I still..." He stopped again and shook his head and did not finish the sentence. Ida did not push him to finish it. She understood what the unfinished sentence contained. The fact that he still loved his brother. The fact that you did not stop loving someone just because they had done something that had no defensible justification. The fact that those 2 things existed simultaneously in the same person and could not be resolved by any amount of logic or legal strategy. She understood that specific situation more personally than she intended to reveal. She had her own dark past, her own version of the person who had done something unforgivable and remained, inconveniently, someone she could not fully stop caring about. In her case, it was not a brother but a father, And the thing he had done was not a land transfer but a sustained pattern of dismissal and belittlement that had eventually resolved into her departure from Cincinnati at the age of 24, leather satchel in hand, never returning. She still wrote him letters at Christmas, brief and correct, and received brief and correct letters in return. It was a kind of love that had been reshaped by necessity into something that could survive the distance between who people were and who you had needed them to be. She did not tell Levi Shepard any of this on the ride back from Cheyenne. She stored it where she stored most personal things, in the orderly archive of herself, and she told herself she would look at it later. The affidavit was prepared the following week by Walter Pruitt's office, sent by mail to the Laramie notary, and signed by Ida on a Thursday morning in a small back room of the claims office with Harold Briggs as an additional witness. The injunction against the Continental Land Trust survey was filed 10 days later. The trust's lawyers contested it, naturally. There was a back-and-forth of legal filings that Ida followed by proxy, receiving occasional reports from Levi when he came into the telegraph office to send communications to Pruitt in Cheyenne. He came in roughly once a week. Every time he came in, they talked for longer than the business of the telegram required. Harold Briggs noticed this and said nothing, which was the most diplomatically intelligent thing Harold had done in years. One afternoon in mid-May, Levi came in with news that the injunction had been granted. The survey team would not be coming to the Shepard Ranch that month. The territorial court had recognized the contested nature of the title and agreed to hold proceedings pending a full hearing in the fall. He told Ida this at the counter of the telegraph office, and she felt something move in her chest that she had been keeping carefully controlled since the afternoon she stood in his doorway with a shaking piece of paper in her hand. "That is very good news," she said. "It is," he agreed. Then, without any of the preamble or hedging that she might have expected, "Would you ride out to the ranch on Sunday? I would like to show you the south pasture. And the river." A pause. "I would like you to see what it is that we are fighting for." She went on Sunday. The south pasture in late May was a different creature from the ranch she had first seen in early April. The grass was tall and green and moved in long rolling waves when the wind came through, and the cattle were scattered across it in the loose, purposeful way of animals who knew exactly where they were and found it satisfactory. The river along the south edge of the property ran clear and quick, swollen with snowmelt, and the trees along its banks had leafed out into a pale young green that made the whole corridor look like a painting of something rather than an actual thing. Levi showed her the water rights first. He was systematic about it, explaining the survey markers and the original homestead boundaries, and where the river corridor fell within the claim, because he wanted her to understand the legal geography of what she had already agreed to help defend. She understood it perfectly, with the part of her mind that processed spatial information and translated it into the same pattern language she applied to everything. But what she was also understanding, in a less organized and more unsettling way, was the ranch itself, the way it felt to be standing in the south pasture on a warm Sunday in late May with the river running, and the cattle moving, and this man beside her who knew every inch of this land with a specific, earned bodily knowledge that she found she could not look at steadily without feeling something she was not quite ready to name. "You built most of the improvements yourself?" she asked. "The barn and the second pasture fence. My father built the house. I have maintained it." He looked across the south pasture. "Every post in that fence, every board in that barn floor. Every year of grazing rotation that keeps the grass at that quality." His voice was level, but there was something underneath it that was not level at all. "This is 30 years of my family's work. What Ellis signed away is not just land, it is." He stopped. "I know," Ida said. He looked at her. "I believe you actually do know." "The telegraph records I organized last month," she said. "The summary I wrote. Did it seem to you like the work of someone who found the matter abstract?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "No, it seemed like the work of someone who understood what was at stake and cared about it." "I found that I did," she said honestly. I found that I cared considerably. There was a silence between them that was not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that exists between people who have said something true and are letting it settle. Ida, he said. He had not used her first name before. It landed differently than she had expected, more certain, more direct. Yes. Why did you stay, that first evening, when you could have ridden back to Laramie? She had thought about this question many times in the weeks since that evening. She had good answers and she had honest answers, and she had come to realize those were different things. The good answer was that she had sensed she could be useful and had acted on that sense. The honest answer was more complicated. Because I felt responsible, she said. I was the one who brought the news, and I could see what it was going to mean for you, the weight of it. I found I did not want to simply deliver that weight and then ride away. He nodded slowly. And the other reason, she raised an eyebrow. What other reason? There was another reason, a different one from responsibility. I could see it in you when you looked at this land today. She was quiet for a moment. She was not accustomed to being read accurately. It happened so rarely that when it did, her first instinct was a kind of defensive surprise, followed by something warmer and more difficult. I find I am drawn to things that are worth fighting for, she said carefully. I have always been more engaged by a problem that is real and significant than by anything theoretical or abstract. You have a real and significant problem, and she looked at the river. I have been in Laramie for 4 years. I am good at my work. I have a life that is organized and sufficient. She paused. It is occasionally very quiet. She had not meant to say that last part. Levi did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Would you like to see the barn?" And the way he said it, the quiet matter-of-fact ordinariness of it, made her laugh, which was not something she had expected on a Sunday afternoon in the south pasture of a ranch that was currently the subject of a territorial court case. She saw the barn. She also saw the vegetable garden behind the house that he had planted in the second week of April, and the root cellar dug into the hillside behind it, and the workshop where he repaired equipment, and where she noticed he had a library of technical manuals along one wall that was considerably larger than most people would have expected to find in a ranch workshop. She looked at the spines: surveying, engineering, soil science, veterinary medicine. You are self-educated, she said, largely, in a significant number of fields. Ranching requires it, he said. You cannot afford to not know things when you are this far from the people who know them professionally. I understand that reasoning precisely, she said. He looked at her with a directness that she had come to recognize as characteristic. No ornamentation, no deflection, just the thing itself. I suspect you understand most things precisely, he said. I try to, she said. It is the only reliable method I have found. They ate supper in his kitchen again that evening, and this time it was not an accident of coffee being put on and beans being on the stove. This time it was deliberate on both sides, the kind of thing that people do when they have agreed on something without quite saying so. She helped him cook, which was also deliberate on both sides. She stayed until the stars came out, which she absolutely had not planned, and she rode back to Laramie in the dark with a half-moon and a sky full of stars, and the particular feeling of someone who has agreed to something large and real without yet having found the words for it. The weeks that followed had a shape. Levi came to town on Tuesdays for the telegraph office business with Prout in Cheyenne. On Thursdays, Ida rode out to the ranch after her shift, usually arriving at around 4 in the afternoon and leaving at dusk or shortly after. On those Thursday afternoons they talked and sometimes worked. She had begun helping him organize his own paperwork in preparation for the fall court hearing, and sometimes they simply moved around the ranch doing the necessary work of the ranch in a companionable parallel. She learning the rhythms of the place, and he making room for her presence in those rhythms with a naturalness that she found, in the organized part of her mind, remarkable. In June, one of the trust's lawyers appeared in Laramie. His name was Garfield Holt, and he came to the telegraph office on a Tuesday morning when Levi was there at the counter, and he introduced himself with a smooth, professional courtesy that did not quite conceal the thing underneath it, which was the particular confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. He wanted to discuss settlement options, he said. There were arrangements the trust was prepared to make that would allow Mr. Shepard to remain on the property as a working tenant, with a long-term lease arrangement and fair compensation for the improvements he had made. It was, he suggested, a more practical outcome than a protracted court battle. Levi heard him out in complete silence. Then he said, "No." Holt looked slightly less smooth for a moment. "Mr. Shepard, the legal position of the trust is extremely solid. Ellis Shepard was a valid co-signatory on the original claim and his right to—" "I heard you," Levi said. "No." Holt looked at Ida, who was behind the counter and had not attempted to remove herself from the conversation. She looked back at him with an expression of complete professional neutrality. After Holt left, Levi turned to her. "He will come back." "Yes," she agreed, "or someone like him." Settlement is cheaper than litigation from their perspective, and they will keep offering it as long as they think there is a chance you will accept. There is no chance. I know, she paused, but we should tell Prout that they are making direct contact. That is relevant to the case. She drafted the telegram to Prout herself, with Levi at her elbow, and it was the most clearly and efficiently organized communication she had ever composed, which was saying something. She could feel his presence beside her as a physical weight, not uncomfortable, something more like the way a barn is warm when there is something large and living inside it. In July, the court issued a preliminary ruling, confirming the injunction and scheduling the full hearing for September 12th. Prout sent a telegram to Levi that read, "Case is strong, do not settle," and Ida copied it down from the key and read it to Levi, and then they went to the hotel dining room in Laramie for supper, the first time they had eaten together in town rather than at the ranch, and something shifted that evening in a way that was different from the shifts that had been happening gradually since April. They had been orbiting each other all summer. Orbiting carefully, with the specific carefulness of two people who are both too self-aware to pretend they do not know what is happening, and too cautious to move faster than the situation is actually ready for. But over a meal in the hotel dining room, with the legal case on its way to resolution, and the summer moving through its long Wyoming arc toward something that felt like an ending, and also, possibly, a beginning, the carefulness became something slightly different. "When this is over," Levi said. "The court case, whatever happens, I would like to—" He stopped. He was not, in general, a man who struggled to find words. When he stopped, it was worth paying attention to. "I would like to continue. Whatever this is, I would like it to continue." Ida set her fork down. "I would like that also," she said. He looked at her across the table, and there was something in his face that was open in a way she had not seen before, something that had come forward from behind the hardness and the discipline and the very justified guardedness of a man who had been genuinely betrayed by someone he trusted. It was a considerable thing to see, and she looked at it directly without looking away. "You are the most remarkable person I have encountered in my life," he said, "and I have encountered a fair number of people." "I have encountered a considerable number of unremarkable ones," she said, which was not precisely what she had meant to say but was true in the specific way that her most honest statements tended to be. "You are not among them," he smiled. The geometry of his face changed in the way she had first noticed in April and had not stopped noticing since. "High praise from you," he said. "It is the highest I have given in a long time," she said. "You should take it as such." She had not planned to reach across the table. Her hand moved before the organized part of her mind had quite approved the motion, and it covered his hand where it lay beside his water glass, and she felt him go very still, the same kind of still as that first day in his kitchen, but entirely different in quality. He turned his hand under hers and held it. They stayed at the table for 2 hours after the meal, talking, not about the case or the ranch or the trust, but about the things that had not come up in 4 months of shared crisis and productive collaboration, and carefully maintained professional distance. about what she wanted beyond the work that she was good at, about what he believed in beyond the land he was fighting for, about Cincinnati and the ranch and the telegraph book at 17 and the fence post scar and the library of technical manuals in the workshop, about what a life built on something real looked like when you chose the terms yourself. She rode back to Laramie that night holding the warmth of his hand in hers as a physical memory, and she was not organized about it at all. The court hearing in September was held in Cheyenne. Ida took 4 days' leave from the telegraph office, which Harold Briggs granted without argument, because he had been watching the situation develop since April with the careful attention of a man who knows when something important is happening and is wise enough not to interfere. Walter Prout had built an exceptional case. He opened with the establishment of the original homestead claim and the formal terms under which both Shepard brothers had been co-signatories. He introduced the letter Ellis had signed acknowledging receipt of the buyout payment, and he brought in a land law expert from the University of Wyoming who testified that such a letter, combined with a financial settlement of this nature, established a legitimate equitable claim to extinguishment of Ellis's title interest, regardless of the technical flaw in the formal documentation. Then he called Ida. She sat in the witness chair of the territorial court in Cheyenne, and she answered every question Prout asked her with the same precision she brought to everything: clear, specific, factual, organized. She described the 11 telegrams she had tracked through the Laramie office. She described the timeline she had established from the records. She described the communications between the trust's lawyers and Ellis Shepard that demonstrated the trust had been fully aware of the disputed nature of the title when they proceeded with the purchase. Then the trust's lawyer, Garfield Holt, cross-examined her. He was good at cross-examination. He tried to establish that her memory might be imperfect, that her organization of the records might reflect a bias toward the client she had come to know, that her role as a telegraph operator rather than a legal professional meant her interpretation of the significance of the communications was subjective and unreliable. Ida answered every challenge with absolute calm. She could describe every telegram she had referenced by date, time of transmission, routing number, and word-for-word content. She could explain precisely how she had cross-referenced the communications against each other to establish the timeline. She could demonstrate, by citing specific passages from 3 different legal documents she had read in preparation for this testimony, exactly why the trust's awareness of the disputed title was legally relevant to the question of bad faith. Holt paused at one point during the cross-examination and looked at her with an expression that was not quite the smooth professional courtesy he had managed in the Laramie telegraph office. It was something closer to genuine frustration. "Miss Baker," he said, with a precision of his own, "are you a lawyer?" "No," she said. "Then on what basis are you?" "I have the right to answer the questions I have been asked by both counsel," she said, pleasantly and without moving an inch, "and the court can assess the weight of my testimony as it sees fit. But I would note that the accuracy of the records I am describing does not depend on my being a lawyer, and the significance of those records has already been explained by the land law expert your colleague cross-examined earlier this morning." There was a brief silence in the courtroom. The judge, a compact man named Aldrich who had the manner of someone who had seen a great many things and was no longer surprised by any of them, made a note on the paper in front of him and did not visibly react. Levi, seated at the table with Prout, was watching her. She could see him in her peripheral vision, very still, and she could see that expression she had been learning all summer, the open one, the one that had come forward from behind the hardness and the discipline. After the testimony during the recess, Prout found her in the corridor outside the courtroom with a look of concentrated satisfaction. "That," he said, "was the most effective testimony I have seen from a lay witness in 15 years of practice." The judge was listening. "Good," Ida said. Levi came up beside Prout and looked at Ida, and she could see that he wanted to say something substantial and was restraining himself in the corridor of a courthouse because now was not the time and place. He settled for, "Thank you," and then quietly, so only she could hear, "You are extraordinary." She felt something in her chest that was not organized in the slightest. The ruling came 10 days after the hearing. Walter Prout telegraphed it to the Laramie office, and it came through the key on a Wednesday morning with Ida at the board, and she copied it down in her clean and precise handwriting, and then she sat for a moment before she did anything else because the words needed a moment to settle. The ruling found in favor of Levi Shepard. The deed transfer executed by Ellis Shepard had been made in bad faith, as evidenced by the trust's documented awareness of the disputed title and the prior financial settlement between the brothers. The transfer was void. The title reverted to Levi Shepard in full. The Continental Land Trust was ordered to bear the legal costs of the proceeding. She wrote it all out carefully. She put it in a sealed envelope. She sent a junior operator to the front counter and she went to the back where Harold was going over accounts. "I need to go to the ranch," she said. Harold looked at her. He looked at the sealed envelope in her hand. "Take the afternoon," he said. She saddled her horse herself, and she rode the 20 miles in under 3 hours, which was the fastest she had ever made the ride, not because she was rushing exactly, but because something in her was moving toward something with a purpose that the horse seemed to understand and match. Levi was mending fence in the south pasture when she arrived. He saw her coming across the grass from the direction of the house, and he put down the wire stretcher and walked toward her with the particular gait of a man who can read weather and people, who has seen something in the way she is moving and is already turning toward what it means. She dismounted before she reached him, the last 50 yards crossing on foot, and she held out the envelope. He opened it. He read the ruling. He read it a second time. He looked up at her, and she was not sure what she had expected from him in this moment, some version of relief or triumph or vindication. What she saw was something quieter and deeper than any of those things, the expression of a man who has been holding a very large weight for a very long time and has just had someone else help him set it down. "It is over," he said. "It is over," she confirmed. He looked at the south pasture. The grass was gold now, moving in the September wind. The cattle were there, the same 300 head she had seen in early April, plus the calves born that spring. The river was lower with the summer's end, but it was still there, running clear at the south boundary of the land that was, again and definitively, his. Then he looked at her, and she recognized the look in the same way she recognized everything, by the pattern of it, by the meaning coded into every element of it. She had been learning to read this particular face since April, and she knew it very well by now. He put his hand along the side of her face, carefully, the way a man handles something he values and does not want to damage, and he said, "Ida." She put her hand over his. "Yes," she said, which was the answer to a question he had not yet asked aloud but which they both understood completely. He kissed her in the south pasture with the wind moving the grass and the river at the boundary and the sky enormous overhead, and it was nothing like the practical, organized, efficient way she generally moved through the world. It was something else entirely, warm and certain and real in the way that the ranch was real, the way the work had been real, the way every honest thing she had found in Wyoming territory had been real. When they stepped back from each other, she could see that he was slightly undone in the best possible way, and she suspected she was as well. "I have a question," he said. His voice was different, warmer. "I generally prefer to know the question before I commit to an answer," she said. "I know," he said, with the smile that changed the geometry of his face. "Would you consider—" he started again. "I have been thinking since July, since the hotel dining room. I have been thinking about what I want my life to look like when it is not under siege." He looked at the ranch and then back at her. "I would like you to be part of it. I would like to ask you to consider building something here with me. I understand you have a life in Laramie that is organized and sufficient, and occasionally very quiet," she said. He met her eyes. Yes, that. She had organized considerations. She had a job she was good at, a room at the boarding house, a reputation and a professional standing she had built from nothing over 4 years. She had a life that was entirely her own. She had also spent 6 months fighting for this piece of land with this man, and she had come to understand something about herself in the course of it, which was that organized and sufficient was not, in fact, what she wanted. She wanted the thing that was real and significant and worth fighting for. She had known this since April, if she was honest, since the moment she stood in his doorway with a shaking piece of paper and made the conscious choice to stay. "I am not going to give up working," she said. "That is not negotiable." He looked slightly startled by this for only a moment before he nodded. "I would not ask you to. Laramie is 20 miles. "I could do both," she said, thinking. "The office could accommodate. Harold owes me a significant number of accommodations." She looked at the ranch, at the house built from properly cured timber, the barn he had built himself, the river corridor at the south boundary. "And there is more than enough here to keep a precise mind occupied." "Considerably more," he said. She looked at him directly. "Then yes," she said, "I would like that. I would like to build something here with you." He looked at her as though she had given him something he had not quite believed he would receive, and she thought that was probably one of the more accurate assessments she had seen him make. They were engaged by October, which Laramie found both unsurprising and considerably interesting, because the story of the telegraph operator who had delivered the bad news and then helped the rancher win the court case had made its way through the town in the efficient, organic way of information in small communities. Harold Briggs said he had known since April. The other operators said they had known since the trips to Cheyenne. The woman at the boarding house, who had been watching Ida leave early on Thursdays and return late, said she had known since June. Ida said that everyone had known before she did, which was the one area in which her precision had failed her completely, and which she found retrospectively both exasperating and genuinely funny. They married in December of 1884 in the small church in Laramie, on a day when the temperature was 12 degrees and the sky was a blue so cold it looked like glass. It was a small ceremony. 20 people from Laramie and the surrounding ranches, Harold Briggs and the junior operators, Walter Prout, who had ridden up from Cheyenne specifically, 2 neighboring ranchers whose wives had been quietly supportive of Ida's Thursday ride since July. There was no family from either of their pasts. Ida's family in Cincinnati received a letter, brief and correct, and sent a brief and correct letter in return. Levi Shepard was not present and had not been contacted. He was in Denver, as far as either of them knew, and that was where the matter of Levi Shepard rested, not forgiven, not resolved in any final emotional sense, simply placed in the category of things that had happened and been survived and could not be undone, which was where most true things ended up eventually. Levi held her hand through the ceremony with the same solidity he brought to everything, and when the minister said the words and they exchanged the rings she had chosen herself, plain gold bands from the jeweler in Laramie, she felt the thing she had been carefully not naming all summer settle into its actual name without any further delay. She loved him. She had loved him since before she was ready to, which was typical of her relationship with anything that genuinely mattered. The winter after the wedding was a working winter and a good one. Ida kept her position at the telegraph office, negotiating with Harold a schedule that allowed her to work Tuesday through Friday and be at the ranch from Friday evening through Monday evening, with a horse and the 20-mile ride as the regular infrastructure of her week. It was not a conventional arrangement. In 1884, in Wyoming territory, there were not many conventional arrangements available to begin with, and Ida Baker had never been interested in conventional arrangements in any case. She was good at the ranch. She had not anticipated quite how good. The organizational mind that served her well at the telegraph key turned out to serve her equally well in the management of the ranch's accounts and paperwork, which had been perfectly functional under Levi's stewardship, but which became, under Ida's systematic attention, something considerably more efficient. She organized the livestock records by a system she devised herself, tracking individual animals and their histories in a ledger she designed for the purpose. She reviewed the supply contracts with the Laramie merchants and renegotiated 2 of them, saving a meaningful amount over the course of the year. She read through the soil science manuals in the workshop and developed an opinion about the South pasture's rotation schedule that turned out, when she discussed it with Levi, to align closely with conclusions he had reached himself through observation. "You have already been doing this," she said, looking at the rotation map they had spread on the kitchen table. "Empirically," he said, "you have put it in a framework. The framework makes it replicable. You could bring in a hired hand who did not have your 20 years of observation and have him follow the system." Levi looked at her map. Then he looked at her. "You are going to reorganize everything, are you not?" "Gradually," she said. "And only if you agree." "I agree to all of it," he said. "I agreed to all of it in July." She felt warm in the way that she had learned to feel warm, specifically and without embellishment. She kissed him in the kitchen over the rotation map, which was not how she generally worked, and which was entirely characteristic of what marriage to Levi Shepard had done to her fundamental organizational systems. Spring of 1885 brought good grass and a good calf crop, and a rider from Denver who arrived at the ranch gate on a Wednesday morning in April. He was a thin man with a letter in his hand, and Levi was in the barn when he arrived, and Ida was at the kitchen table going over the breeding records. She went to the door when she heard the horse. The letter was from Levi Shepard. She paid the rider and took the letter inside and set it on the kitchen table and went to get Levi. She did not open it. It was not her letter to open. But she put her hand briefly on Levi's arm when she handed it to him, and she stayed in the kitchen while he read it. Ellis's letter was not a long one. It said that he had heard from a mutual acquaintance that the court case had been decided against the trust, and that the land was back in Levi's name. It said that he was sorry. The word appeared twice in the letter, once at the beginning and once at the end, which was either genuine or performative and possibly both. It said that he had needed the money and had told himself that Levi would survive without the land because Levi was the kind of man who survived things. It said that he was in Denver still, working in a different trade company now, doing better. It asked if Levi would write back. Levi read it twice. Then he set it down on the table and looked at it for a long moment. "What will you do?" Ida asked. "I do not know yet," he said honestly. "I am not ready to write back, but I think that I will eventually, when I have decided what I want to say." "That is reasonable," she said. "Is it?" He looked up at her. "Sometimes I am not sure I know what reasonable looks like with him anymore." "Reasonable is whatever you can live with," she said. "Whatever you can sustain over time without it eating at you. The anger is legitimate. The absence of forgiveness is legitimate. But so is choosing to eventually write back if that is what you find you need." She paused. "There is no correct answer. There is only the one that is true for you." He looked at her with the open expression, the one she knew best. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" "I frequently do not," she said. "But I try to say the true thing instead, and they overlap more often than you might expect." He reached across the table and took her hand in the way that had become ordinary and was also, still, every time, something she felt completely. "What would I do without you?" he said. "Manage," she said, "but less efficiently." He laughed, which was something he did more now than he had in April of the previous year, and it was one of the specific things she loved most about the year that had passed, watching the laughter come back to a face that had been holding something heavy. By the summer of 1885, the ranch was running well. Levi had hired an additional hand named Tom Greer, a steady, quiet man from Nebraska who had worked cattle all his life, and who accepted Ida's organized presence in the ranch's paperwork and management without any apparent difficulty, possibly because she paid him on time and accurately to the penny, and people who were paid on time and accurately to the penny tended not to ask many questions about the person doing the accounting. In late summer, Ida discovered she was pregnant. She determined this with her characteristic precision, and then sat with the knowledge for a day before she told Levi, because she needed to organize the practical implications first before she could address the emotional ones. The practical implications were: she would continue working at the telegraph office through as much of the pregnancy as was feasible. She would need to arrange an extended leave in the months around the birth. She would need Harold to train the junior operators more thoroughly to cover her absences. And she would need to discuss with Levi what the rhythm of their shared life would look like with a child in it. These were all manageable things. She had managed considerably less manageable situations with far fewer resources. She told Levi on a Thursday evening at the kitchen table, over coffee, in as direct and unembellished a way as she told most important things. He was very still for a moment, in the familiar way that Levi Shepard was still when something large was landing. Then he looked at her with an expression she had not seen before on his face, one that was not in her existing vocabulary of his expressions, something that was joy and something that was enormous and something else that she could not quite translate, except as the face of a man confronting a good thing he had not quite let himself believe in. He came around the table and held her, the way you hold something that is real and present and yours in the most fundamental sense of that word, and she held him back with both arms, and neither of them said anything for a long time, which was fine because neither of them needed to. "A boy," he said finally into her hair. "I think it will be a boy, though I recognize I have no basis for that belief whatsoever." "You are correct that you have no basis," she said, "but I find I also think it might be a boy." It was a boy. He arrived in March of 1886 in the bedroom of the ranch house, attended by the Laramie midwife, who had been making the 20-mile ride to deliver ranch babies for 15 years, and who took Ida Baker Shepard's organized approach to childbirth with the practical appreciation of a professional encountering a client who had actually read the relevant material and prepared accordingly. They named him James, after Levi's father. James Shepard, born in Wyoming Territory in the spring of 1886, with dark eyes like his father's and a quality of focused attention that Ida recognized with something between amusement and wonder. She looked at him the first morning and thought, in the organized part of her mind, "This is the most significant and interesting project I have ever undertaken, and I have no efficient system for it at all, and I find I do not mind in the slightest." Levi sat beside her on the bed with James in his arms, and she watched him with the child the way she had learned to watch him with everything, noting the specific gravity of it, the way he held something he valued and did not want to damage. His face was doing the thing it did, the open thing, and it was more open than she had ever seen it. "I have not sent Ellis's letter back yet," he said. "No," she agreed. "I think I will write to him. Tell him about James." He was quiet for a moment. "I do not think I can be what we were before, but I think I can be something that exists without the betrayal between us eating everything else." He looked at the baby, then at her. "You said that, the one that is true for you. I think the true thing for me is that he is still my brother. That is just what is true. The rest of it I can work with what is true." "Yes," Ida said, "that is reasonable." "The true thing and the reasonable thing," he said with a smile. "Overlapping," she said. "He wrote to Ellis that week." The letter was short and did not extend anything that had not been earned, but it told Ellis about James and about the ranch and about the year that had passed. Ellis wrote back 6 weeks later, a longer letter than the first one, describing his life in Denver more fully. They did not become what they had been, but they became something that could exist without being destructive. A correspondence between two men who shared a history and a grief and the specific complicated love of brothers who had hurt each other in ways that were not equivalent but were equally real. Ida read both letters because Levi asked her to, because she had become in the course of the past 2 years the person whose judgment he trusted most with the things that required actual judgment. She read them and said what she thought was true, and he made his own decisions from there, which was exactly how she had always believed things should work. James grew into a sturdy and curious child, who followed his father around the ranch from the moment he could walk steadily, and followed his mother around the telegraph office from the moment she decided he was old enough to not destroy anything, which she estimated conservatively. He was fascinated by the telegraph key in the particular way of a child who recognizes a language he does not yet speak and intends to learn it. By the time James was 3, Ida had taught him the rhythm of the simplest letters. By the time he was 5, he could tap out his own name and his father's name and the word horse with perfect timing. Levi watched this with the contained delight of a man who had learned to contain his delight precisely in order to savor it. "He is going to be an operator," Ida said, watching James concentrate over the key at the office. "He is going to be a rancher," Levi said. "Both," Ida said firmly. "He will be both." They looked at each other over the head of their son, and the particular quality of that look was one she had become entirely fluent in, the private language of two people who had built something together from a crisis and a shaking piece of paper and a choice to stay. The summer of 1888 brought news that the Continental Land Trust of Denver had dissolved. Walter Prout telegraphed it with a brevity that was entirely characteristic. "Trust insolvent, assets liquidated, Shepard precedent cited in 3 subsequent cases. Excellent outcome." Levi read the telegram and then handed it to Ida without saying anything, the way he sometimes communicated things that were between them and did not need words. She read it and handed it back and said, "Prout's billing rate was worth every dollar." Levi smiled. "Every dollar," he agreed. They were expecting their second child by autumn of that year, and this time the rhythm of the pregnancy was familiar in a way the first had not been. Ida continuing her modified schedule at the telegraph office until the week before her confinement. The midwife now a regular presence whose horse knew the road to the Shepard ranch by heart. The ranch itself running with the quiet confidence of a place that has been properly organized by two people who are both very good at their particular aspects of it. The second child was also a boy. They named him William, and he was from the start a different creature from James, louder and rounder and possessed of a charm that was immediately apparent to everyone including the cattle, who James had always approached with the same focused gravity as his mother, and who William ran toward with an enthusiasm that suggested he had not been informed that cattle were large animals with hooves. James took his role as elder brother with great seriousness, and a degree of patience that Levi said was entirely from Ida's side of the equation. Ida said she was the most impatient person she knew, and that James's patience must have originated elsewhere. They debated this with the pleasure of two people who have enough common ground to enjoy disagreeing about the remainder. By 1890, the Shepard Ranch had expanded by 300 acres along the northern boundary through a legitimate purchase from a neighbor who was moving his family to Oregon, and Ida had been offered and accepted the role of senior supervisor for the Wyoming Territorial Telegraph Service's Laramie corridor, which was a position that had not previously existed, and which Harold Briggs had essentially invented in order to retain her as the operational linchpin of the region's communications infrastructure. She accepted it on the condition that the schedule remained compatible with the ranch and the children, and Harold, who had learned 6 years ago that Ida Baker's conditions were the beginning of a negotiation in which she always won, agreed. The work was interesting in the way the work had always been interesting, the patterns of it, the accumulated intelligence of what moved through the key on any given day, the larger picture that built itself from 1,000 individual messages. She was good at it. She was going to be good at it for the rest of her working life, and she knew this about herself with the same precision with which she knew most things. She was also, simultaneously, good at being a wife and mother and ranch manager, which she had not known about herself ahead of time because she had never had the data. The data, accumulated over 6 years of Thursdays and weekends and full partnership in a life that was real and significant and worth fighting for, was unambiguous. On a Sunday afternoon in the fall of 1890, Ida sat on the porch of the ranch house and watched Levi and James mending fence in the near pasture. James was 8 years old and already moving with a version of his father's purposeful efficiency, carrying tools and holding the wire stretcher with a seriousness that was completely genuine. William was in the house taking his nap, which he objected to every day with great spirit, and eventually succumbed to every day with equal spirit. Levi looked up from the fence post and saw her on the porch and raised one hand in the simple gesture that meant "I see you." She raised hers in return. She thought about the 20-mile ride in April of 1884, the wind coming at her sideways, the envelope in her satchel, the way she had rehearsed the words and told herself she would feel nothing, and had been wrong about every single thing she had predicted about that day. She thought about the paper shaking in her hands, about the man turning around, about the specific quality of a betrayal and the specific quality of a choice to stay, and how those two things, side by side, had built everything that currently existed in her field of vision. She thought about how she had been sent to deliver bad news to a rancher, and how she had stayed to help him survive what she had brought, and how the surviving had taken them both somewhere neither of them had been going when they started. Levi crossed the yard toward the porch with James at his side, and the late afternoon light came across the grass, the way it came across Wyoming grass in autumn, long and gold, and completely without apology for being beautiful. He came up the porch steps and sat beside her in the other chair, and James detoured through the house in the direction of the kitchen and the remains of the morning's bread, which he had been monitoring with quiet intent since breakfast. "Good fence," she said. "Good helper," he said. "He has your eye for the detail. He has your steadiness." "Both," Levi said, with the word she had said years ago and which had become a kind of shorthand between them. "Both. The boy who would be an operator and a rancher. The woman who ran the telegraph corridor and the ranch accounts. The man who built a fence post by post and read soil science and held things carefully and did not damage them." She leaned her head against his shoulder, which she had also not planned the first time she did it and which had become entirely natural, the way breathing was natural, the way the daily work of a life was natural. "6 years," she said. "6 years," he agreed. "I have been thinking," she said, "about the northern boundary, the acreage we purchased from Sorensen. I think there is a possibility for a second water access point if we survey it correctly. I read a piece in the Territorial Agricultural Journal about secondary irrigation channels, and there is a method that might be applicable to the topography north of the creek bend." He turned to look at her with the smile that had been changing the geometry of his face for 6 years. "You are going to reorganize the North 40, he said. "Gradually," she said, "and only if you agree." "I have always agreed," he said. "I agreed in July of 1884. She raised her head from his shoulder and looked at him directly, the way she had looked at him across the table in the hotel dining room and in the South pasture, and in the courtroom in Cheyenne and in the kitchen over the rotation map, and every time after that, directly and without looking away. "You agreed before I did," she said. "You arrived at the same conclusion," he said. "The method was different." "The method is always different," she agreed. "The conclusion tends to be the same." He put his hand along the side of her face in the way he had in the South pasture on the day the ruling came, carefully, and she put her hand over his. And the cattle moved in the pasture, and William woke up from his nap with the usual vigorous objections to having slept. And James called from inside the house about the bread, and the sky was enormous, and the grass was gold, and the ranch was theirs, unambiguously and permanently and fully theirs. Ida Baker Shepard thought that organized and sufficient was a fine description of many things, and that it was not, as it turned out, an accurate description of this. This was something else entirely. This was exactly right.